Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Chase Jarvis. Welcome to another episode of the Chase Jarvis Live Show here on Creativelive. You know this show. This is where I sit down with the world's top creators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders, and I do my best to unpack actionable and valuable insights with the goal of helping you live your dreams in career, in hobby, and in life. My guest today started out as an investment banker / management consultant, then founded Samasource, which helps poor people or people in poor countries make money and get out of that poverty, and then started a luxury makeup brand. I mean, this is a crazy story that's sourced from those same countries and is sold Sephora stores worldwide. QVC, we'll get into that. And she's just about to launch a New York Times bestselling book. I'm predicting a New York Times bestseller. And she was featured yesterday in the New York Times. Are you guys ready for this one? Drum roll, please. Leila Janah! Yay! Every time I see you, this has been a long time coming.
I know.
I've wanted to have you on the show for literally like years, and we just bumped into each other. And you said, "Oh my God, I would love to do that. It'd be fun." And I said,
Yes.
"I'm gonna own it. I'm gonna text you. We're gonna make it happen." And here we are.
And we did, and I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you. Oh,
I'm not worthy of that introduction, though.
No,
but
you
thank
crush so hard. I am glad that we're together in San Francisco. And B, holy smokes, big article in the New York Times yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before?
Sunday. It was in the Sunday Times.
Sunday Times, and today is Wednesday, so 3 days ago. My time flies. Congratulations.
Thanks.
God.
Thanks. But you know, the PR is only the
That's
nice
right.
veneer on
That's
the real
the veneer,
story.
right? It is. That's the veneer, and that's
Yeah.
what this show. You guys know that. That's what this show's all about. So we're gonna get into it. I just gave a little bit of a history. I know you mostly through Samasource.
Mm-hmm.
Tim Ferriss introduced us. You were on Creativelive with his show, this 4-hour life show, which is a great class.
And that was before we recruited him to come to Africa. He actually saw our work in action in Kenya years ago. He was one of my clients with Samasource.
Amazing.
Fun Tim Ferriss story.
Oh, there's so much to talk about. We should get into it. So one of the things I mentioned to this before we started recording that I love is for people who there's contrast in their life. You started out going one path, and as my friend Katerina Fake, the founder of Flickr and advisor to Creativelive and pal, said, it's never too late to change directions. And from management consulting to founding a what do you call it? Just a nonprofit business that gets people that are in low-income countries or poor countries paid? Mm-hmm. Is that how you do? Give me your words in a very elegant way.
Sure.
How do you describe Samasource?
And it's poor people in poor countries and poor people in the U.S. So we.
Oh, it is in the U.S. too.
Mm-hmm,
I didn't know that.
We have a
amazing.
program called Sama School that operates in low-income communities around the country because we think poverty is an international problem. It's a domestic problem, and the issues are really similar.
Incredible.
So we're called Samasource because Sama means equal in Sanskrit. And I had worked for different nonprofits when I was in college. And this all started because when I was in high school, I got a scholarship from, of all places, a tobacco company. Literally, Big Tobacco.
Wow.
Funded my travel to Africa. And I got the scholarship and I was like, I want to do something different. I was feeling like I wanted an adventure, and I found a volunteer program to go and volunteer in Africa. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go and do that, and I'll use this money. And frankly, I wasn't hell-bent on saving the world. I really just wanted to have an adventure and get out of Dodge. So I did that. I did that in what would have been my second semester.
Where was Dodge?
Southern California.
Southern California. Dodge.
I mean, it's a pretty great place to be.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I was so lucky. I got the scholarship, and I had I went to a really cool math and science magnet school, and I had really supportive teachers, and they were like, okay, well, you can graduate early. You have enough credit, so just go be off on your merry way. Go do something, good for the world.
Wow.
And so I went to Ghana in West Africa, of all places. I had no connection there. My parents thought I was a little bit crazy, but I'm grateful they let me go. And I showed up there, and I was a volunteer English teacher to about 60 kids who were blind and partially sighted in a school in, the middle of rural West Africa.
Wow.
I had no idea what I was doing. I basically plagiarized all the lesson plans from my high school English teacher, and luckily she's really good.
You got this, Leila. You got this.
Exactly, and I started like a creative writing program in the school, and I showed up there thinking I would help all of these poor, starving African kids, and I got there, and my students were so bright. I mean, they could name U.S. senators. They were very up to speed on global politics. They all listened to BBC and Voice of America radio, and the idea that a kid living on less than $2 a day in a poor country could know more about the world than some of my high school peers just blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I realized that I had absorbed this myth about poverty, that we live in a meritocracy, that if you only are willing to work hard enough, you will escape poverty, and that's just not true. And it's heartbreaking.
It is. That's what I just felt my heart break when you said that. It was sort of God, it's just such a reminder.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking and it's unacceptable.
Yeah,
it's 2017. There is enough wealth in the world to solve this problem. No one should be living in that kind of desperation. And so I saw my kids, the people in this school who would have conditions like malaria and not be able to afford a $5 medication to fix their, malaria fever. There was a kid who died in our village of a preventable disease because his mom didn't have the money. And, in Ghana, there wasn't enough money for public health care. So if you have, traumatic injury and you go to the hospital and they don't have enough, enough material for sutures that day, you will die in the hospital. And these just constantly, seeing these avoidable tragedies made me aware that poverty is a problem that we absolutely have to fix. I think it is the biggest moral problem in our lifetimes. And it's the root cause of so many problems we try to fix downstream, whether it's getting people access to clean water, sanitation, healthcare. All of these things are basically caused by poverty. So if you figure out a way to help people increase their incomes, they solve all of those problems on their own. And I learned in Ghana that I think the biggest challenge in a lot of these low-income communities is job creation. So I started thinking, how can I create jobs in a place like, my village that I was living in Ghana? And I went and I studied international development at Harvard. I tried to understand why these people and places were so poor. And I kept coming across this very traditional charity model of, okay, well, our way to solve the problem is let's build a well for these poor people. Let's build a school. Let's send their government a lot of money and hope that the government invests it in the right things. We've invested close to $1 trillion in aid in Africa in the last 60 years, and still incomes for the poorest people have remained virtually the same. They've not crossed $1 a day. And why is that? Something in this model is not working. And so I had that kind of in the background, and then I graduated from college, and my parents didn't have much money, and I needed to have a job, so I took a consulting gig.
Your parents were first generation? Is that right?
I was. I'm first generation. My parents came from India. In the late 70s.
Incredible.
And my brother and I basically lived the American dream. My parents came to the country with 2 suitcases, and we, through public schools, made it into Harvard and Stanford, and we were just blessed in every way by this country's opportunities. And so maybe because of that, it broke my heart to see kids who were equally talented not get the same chances.
Yeah.
And as I studied this problem of poverty more and more, I just realized that our approach to solving it is dead wrong. We are so focused on basically giving handouts in some way. And handouts might make us feel good as the donor, but they don't solve the core problem.
Yeah.
It's like teach a man to fish. It's the oldest adage, and yet we don't do that. So anyway, I took this consulting job right after college because I needed to make some money, and I also wanted to understand how business worked. I had no idea. I mean, I had worked in nonprofits, and I studied, African economic development, so I had no idea how business worked. And I got this 2-year crash course in how to run a business and how to manage a P&L and all the things you learn as a consultant working for big companies. And then as soon as I could, I quit. And I started
Get
this
enough money
business.
in the bank. I love that. That's it's a great way to use the system, the traditional system that we're all pressured by, to create leverage or a catapult for you to go and do something you loved. You knew when you went in that this is the goal. I need to go make some money and create some leverage, and then I'm going to get out.
I knew that I wanted to address the problem of poverty. I had no idea how. I knew also that the traditional nonprofit model didn't seem like it was working. It felt fundamentally disempowering to give handouts to people who actually wanted work.
Yeah.
And what I saw
was it on both sides, the people that were receiving the handouts, I mean, I'm sure they were grateful to receive the handout, but there was some tainted aspect to it, and on our side too, was it a two-sided problem?
Definitely a two-sided problem. Like I remember in Ghana when I came back, I got all of these letters in the mail, these little blue aerograms written by the friends and family members of my students, because they'd all asked for my address. And so they'd get their friends to write me these letters that would be like, "Dear Sister Leila, God bless you. Can you please send me a box of crayons? Can you please send me," I got an ask for a box of water once. And I'm like, somebody took the trouble to go and write me a letter, to go buy an aerogram, get a pencil, write a long letter, mail it to the United States for a box of water? Like, how messed up is this situation?
Yes.
They've been trained to think that the only way that they can get these things is by begging for them, because there's no economic opportunity. And how heartbreaking is that? Like, someone is industrious enough to go and write me a long letter, which frankly, like, my parents weren't even doing when I was in Ghana.
Right.
And so it just seemed like such a broken system. And I felt like the spirit and the incredible energy that all of these young people had in Ghana was being wasted because they had no chance to use that to produce income for themselves.
Incredible.
And I also felt like if those kids had been lucky enough to have the experience I'd had and go to good public schools in Southern California, they would be lawyers and doctors, and they would have like kicked my butt on the SAT. And it just was an accident of birth that put them there and me, in the U.S.
Yeah. So you cracked the nut, though. You figured out a different way of looking at it. That was one of the things that I was intrigued by when we first met, because it was so different from all of the other charity work that I had experienced. And, the traditional ways that you talked about in your long list earlier about, give people this, send over food, dig a well. And I think you're right, they do make us feel better, but your approach was radically different. How'd you start? Because you said you didn't know how to start. And I think this is one of the reasons I want to ask this question, is because there's so many people at home who have an idea, are, burning with the same passion that you were burning with to end poverty in, your village in Ghana and beyond, and yet are paralyzed by not knowing what to do. So walk us through that.
Sure. Well, social entrepreneurship is interesting because you have to be able to solve two sets of problems. One is a set of problems that are experienced by the people you want to help. And the second is a set of problems that a business that those people can be involved in can solve, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So it's like two layers of problems, right?
Okay.
And so I knew that the problem I wanted to solve for people like the ones I'd met in Ghana was poverty. And the way to solve that would be to create employment for them. But I didn't know what kind of employment I could create that would solve a real market need, And so I looked at models like microfinance. Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize in 2006, won it because he figured out that if we could take banking, which has been traditionally very exclusive. Poor people don't get access to bank loans because they don't have credit history, and banks don't want to lend tiny amounts to people who repay them on a weekly basis, right? So they were totally cut out, and he realized if he could loan, $200 to a woman in Bangladesh to start a small, tailoring business or selling, tomatoes or produce, she could repay that loan pretty reliably, much more than a traditional bank would ever expect. And so he started this whole new model of microcredit, which took over the world and served hundreds of millions of people and brought millions of people out of poverty, right? And I looked at microfinance and I thought, that's really interesting. But the challenge with microfinance is we give this loan to a small businesswoman in Bangladesh. Who is she selling stuff to? She's selling stuff to other poor people. So she's locked into a market where everyone else also makes only $2 a day. And so at best, she can sell a few more tomatoes to other poor people, right? There's a cap on how big her market is.
Yeah.
But if instead you can connect poor people to a global market that's much bigger, where they can sell to people who are much wealthier, that's how you catapult them out of poverty. So I thought to myself, what is something that I can train someone from a poor place to do that can actually make them more than $2 a day or $3 a day? What if I could make them $10 a day? $10 a day in a place like Kenya, where we started, is middle class. That means you can afford 3 meals a day, good education, healthcare, clothing, all of the basics. You can pay for your own water and sanitation.
Wow.
So $10 a day, what can you do that makes $10 a day? And I started looking into this more. And at the time when I was management consulting, my first client was an outsourcing firm, a call center. And I was sent off to India to go help this call center go public. And I was really depressed because I thought call centers were bad. I was like, oh God, they're taking jobs away from middle America and reducing economic opportunity. But as I dug deeper, I realized that this model at a larger level could be really powerful because digital work can go to places where the markets are really small, right? Yep. Like the woman in Bangladesh, through a computer, can sell her services to someone in the US. She's not limited anymore. She's not constrained to that local market. Yep. And so it was eye-opening. I thought, well, what if we could train people in these low-income communities to do digital work for companies all over? And by the way, it wouldn't just work in rural Kenya, it could work in rural America, in like rural Arkansas, where we actually have a program now. And so that was the aha moment I had. And then over nights and weekends, over a span of 2 years, I read everything I could about social entrepreneurship. I read every book that Muhammad Yunus had written. I read everything I could about starting a business. I wrote this like really shitty business plan on nights and weekends. Pardon my language.
No, take it there. Go, girl.
And I found, actually I started submitting my business plan to competitions I found online. I had to hustle to even make money in college. Like I had 3 jobs and I had scholarships and my parents never had any money. So I was used to hustling and like figuring out ways that people would pay me to do stuff.
The 5 to 9.
Exactly, yeah. The 5 to 9. And so that's why I support the idea of a side hustle, because I did it for 2 years when I was consulting. And then finally, lo and behold, this business plan competition took my business plan and said, okay, we're gonna advance you to the semifinals. We're gonna fly you to Amsterdam and you can present your business. And if you place in this award ceremony, you can get up to 30,000 euros for your business, which is like such a tiny amount of money, but it was enough to get me started.
Incredible.
So I won second place, and with that 22,000 euros, I quit my job and started Samasource. And the model was I would go and find technology companies that had work that we could do, things like data entry, like entering business cards into a database, or transcribing audio files. We actually did that for Tim Ferriss when he was writing one of his books.
Amazing.
So he'd record these audio files and he needed somebody to transcribe them. And then on the back end, I would train people in a community in Kenya from a slum to do this basic digital work.
And you personally went there and trained them? Or you and a small team of people?
I went there and I found an entrepreneur in Kenya who was running an internet cafe business and failing. He couldn't make enough money to generate the returns to pay for his internet cafe business. So I'm like, you have the computers. You have access to local talent. Can you train people to do this data entry work? And he's like, no problem. And Kenya has a large population of people, just like my students in Ghana, who can read and write, who are bright and motivated, but are living on less than $2 a day in the most abhorrent conditions because they simply were, born in a place where there's little economic opportunity. So Steve Muthe, sadly he passed away a few years ago, but Steve Muthe was my first business partner, and he was this Kenyan entrepreneur running this internet cafe. So he was recruiting kids from the slums, not kids, but like 19-year-olds, to come and do the work.
And kids when you're our age.
Kids when our exactly, the ripe old age of 34. And I was doing all the quality assurance myself. So like I was using Basecamp, this like software.
Oh, yeah.
And so they would like log into Basecamp and I'd send them these files. I found one guy to be my client in the Bay Area. He runs this company called Benetech, and they had this library for blind readers called Bookshare, and he needed transcription. So I got a $30,000 contract from him, and I basically told him, look, I will personally do the transcription myself if like these Kenyans can't get it right. And of course the Kenyans blew it out of the water. They were like amazing. They had the best quality, and I would just do the QA, and then I would send it to the client, and that's how we got started. And now 9 years later, we have moved over 8,000 workers and their families, so a total of over 35,000 people out of poverty. So from an average of under $2 a day to an average of over $10 a day. And what's amazing is that they stay at that level. They stay out of poverty after working with us because all of a sudden they get exposed to the digital economy and the office job, the formal sector, skills. Yeah. And so they never go back to where they were before. And it's really amazing to see how people are using this income. They're sending their kids to school. I mean, we have these incredible stories of people like saying their entire lives change. They move out of the slum, they eat better food. I mean, literally everything changes when you increase your income, 400%.
Wow. Well, you cracked a particular nut, but I'm also interested in the trend that you were a part of and have been a prime mover in, as you said earlier, just the social entrepreneur movement. Talk to us about that at the macro level. I love the detail. You're transcribing and you're helping low-income folks in these low-income areas get out. Talk about I think there's a lot of people who want to do good in the world. They want to put, Creativelive is a company that it's a for-profit company, but we have 10 million students all over the world. We don't get the kinds of stories of going from $0 or $1 or $2 a day, but total life transformation from 4xing their income. But I'm really curious, you've done it in a very different way. You've cracked a hard problem. Talk to me about the trend. Is it fluff? Is it real? And I mean, how would you suggest someone who's interested in that think about it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's so real because I see the data. Cone Communications released a study a couple of years ago that showed that 9 out of 10 millennials are willing to switch brands to one associated with a good cause. And increasingly, these younger consumers are becoming savvy about which causes are fluff and which are real.
Yeah, and also which are well run.
Totally.
Yeah.
And what you see, I remember being friends with Neil Blumenthal, who's one of the co-founders of Warby Parker. Before he started Warby Parker, he was the CEO of a nonprofit called Vision Spring, which was a really innovative nonprofit that was helping people get access to eyeglasses, not by handouts, not by giving them eyeglasses, but by training local entrepreneurs to sell eyeglass kits and teach them how to repair broken eyeglasses.
Wow.
And so it was a give work kind of model, an employment model that also solved the problem of glasses. And then he went on to start Warby Parker, which is now the single biggest donor to Vision Spring. And it's an amazing model. They're a B corporation. They're upstanding in so many ways. And millennials love brands like Warby Parker because it's not fluff. It's not like they're just writing a check to some nonprofit that's not affiliated. It's like core to their business to provide sight for as many people as possible. And people love the idea that they're voting with their dollars, especially I think when you feel disempowered politically. People realize that maybe they can make the change they want to see in the world outside of politics in the way that they purchase and consume and for the companies that they work for.
That's such a powerful lever that most people don't realize that they have that at their disposal.
Totally.
Yeah.
And we don't even think about so our mission at Sama is to change the way that corporations spend their money. Imagine if the corporate budgets that go into catering and even employee swag and all the stuff that companies buy, imagine if they purchased from social enterprises, right? Imagine if they purchased from vendors that address poverty. There are organizations in this country that are hiring people from reentry populations, people just leaving prison, to make jeans, to make sweatshirts. Why wouldn't you want to do that if you're in charge of procurement at a company and you have to buy corporate swag for your employees? Why wouldn't you choose to buy from the nonprofit that's employing, people who are down on their luck, right? So I feel like this is a huge movement, and we're just starting to see that these two worlds that we thought were so different, the world of social impact and all this nonprofit stuff, and the world of profit maximizing business, we're starting to see all of these links between the two and realizing that we can't just push social impact to nights and weekends and to nonprofits. We have to embed it in the way that we run our companies.
So powerful. And I feel like you also touched on something in there, which is that we're at the front end of this. Even the concept, the phrase is social entrepreneurship it's 5 years old, 10 years old?
Totally new.
10 years old? Yeah, you've been doing this for 9 years. Did you have a name for it when you started it? Was it called that?
No. I think it was called, Muhammad Yunus was calling it social business, but I mean very early days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's a movement, and to be so early on, where do you see Samasource going from here? Is it just going to continue to grow? And I know at least one thing you brought back to rural Arkansas, you said. So give us what's the 1,000-foot view?
Sure. Well, right now in this country, it blows my mind that if you just look at how government is spending its money, government is a big purchaser of goods and services. Why aren't there requirements that city governments purchase from social enterprises? Right? Like we have a huge problem with prisons in this country. We incarcerate way too many people for nonviolent drug offenses. Once you get incarcerated, it becomes incredibly difficult to be a productive member of society and contribute to the economy. Lots of data. And I think there should be incentives for companies that are willing to hire people who are coming out of prison for nonviolent drug offenders, because you're preventing that person from being on welfare. You're preventing that person from being a burden to the taxpayer. You're getting that person into a productive job, right? Yeah. We don't do any of that now. It's shocking to me. Like, we don't incentivize the kind of society we want to create. So I think there is, for Sama, such a huge opportunity to show the world that the model that we use to build Samasource can be used in other industries. And so I'm writing a book that, well, I just finished writing it. It's coming out in September.
So cool. I can't wait. Make sure that I get an advance copy.
Definitely.
Please. Oh, I love it.
Definitely. Your name is on it. It's called Give Work. And the idea behind Give Work is, what if we could shift 1% of the budget that companies spend on goods and services, their procurement budget, to sourcing from social enterprises that give work to low-income people? And it doesn't have to be people in Africa. It could be people right here. I met with the CEO of Levi's recently, and Levi's is now sourcing a percentage of their denim from a nonprofit factory in Texas that employs military veterans and people who are low income to make jeans. Like, why wouldn't you pay $10 more for that pair of jeans that is helping someone who served your country? And so I think that this is going to become a movement, a give work movement, and we want to build a pledge system where companies can pledge to at least spend, 1%
like
of their
1%
procurement
for
budget.
the planet.
Exactly.
I love
exactly.
this.
1% to give work. And it can be local and it can be international. And by doing that, those companies are actively solving the problems that would otherwise be outsourced to philanthropy. And instead of just like cutting a check, a percentage of profits, and donating it, why not embed that social impact in the way that you're working every day? And I talked to so many CEOs who were like, this is easy. Like, I'm already spending the money. I might as well spend it on a vendor that's doing good. So I think that's the vision. That's the future.
Wow. There's so many things I want to talk about. I'm putting pins in these things. This is my job, not yours, so I'm whinging here. I want to talk about like 5 different things, but I want to go back before I go to how companies can get effective or be more effective, and some of the ways that we can support your book and further your vision. I want to go back to the decision of how you figured out what to do, like business plan, competition. Did you analyze? You said you read everything you could, and again, I'm going back to the mind and the hearts and the souls of the people who are listening and watching. There are so many people who are in your shoes. Can you give them some sort of categorical advice on how to get started?
Totally.
Okay.
So, the brain learns through pattern recognition, right? That's how kids learn. It's actually how machines learn as well. And so one of the most important things, I think, is to surround yourself with examples of what you want to do. And the best way to learn is to find people who are doing similar things and follow them. Follow them on social media. Now, because of like Instagram and Facebook and all of these tools we have to follow people's daily lives, you can learn so much more from example than you could before. And when I was starting Sama, I mean, it's hard to believe, but like that was like right when Twitter was getting started. So we didn't have a lot of these examples in real time, and you couldn't follow someone's journey the same way you can now. So I read a lot of biographies. I read Muhammad Yunus's books. I read biographies of a lot of women who inspired me. There is such a lack, sadly, of stories about women entrepreneurs, but I tried to find the ones I could. And then I looked at their behaviors, and I was like, how can I model myself after this person or that person? I tried to meet as many inspiring leaders and CEOs as I could. I remember I once met Howard Schultz, and I picked his brain, and he sent me like 4 of his recommended books, and I poured through them, and I like flagged every page and highlighted them. And so it really was like a learning exercise for me. And I got tons of stuff wrong. So I think the other thing is just to realize that you're bound to make mistakes, and nothing's going to be perfect as you're building something.
Yeah, it's the concept that it's linear. I think that's what people think. I have to go here, 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 here. It just, and also the thinking and the planning gets in the way of the doing. And what I heard from you is you injected yourself into communities. You created it where there wasn't one. You modeled behavior after the people that you saw doing the things that you liked. You were ravenous with respect to material that you could get on the topic. And all of those things are actions. It's a lot less cerebral and a lot more like physical. Sure, you're reading books, but there's actually the sitting down and making time and the reading. Yeah, I feel like. Do you see that? Is that I've seen you speak, and I've always seen long lines of people wanting to talk to you when you get off stage. Is that some of the questions that they ask when you get off stage?
Yeah, like how do you do it? How do you start? Like, how did you get connected to the people you got connected to? And, I think one of the things that I learned is that you'd be surprised how many people will respond if you directly message them. And even if it's 1 out of every 100 people, that one person might be, in my case, it was Reid Hoffman. I actually sent Reid Hoffman a cold, in-mail on LinkedIn.
By the way, if you don't know Reid, he's the founder of LinkedIn, billionaire, Greylock's an investor here in Creativelive, just amazing human.
Tech mogul, amazing human.
I mean, was it PayPal?
He was part of the early PayPal mafia, and then he was on the board of Kiva, which is a peer-to-peer microfinance platform that I really respect, and I had followed his journey there, and I just always felt like he was a kindred spirit, and so I literally sent him an in-mail. And I was like, Reid, I saw that you just made this huge donation to Kiva. Like, would you donate to Samasource? Here's what I'm doing. And he basically was like, okay, I'm not going to write you a check, but I'll take a meeting with you. And lo and behold, a billionaire said yes to an ask that I had. And at that point, Sama was tiny. We had no cachet. I was not speaking everywhere. That was just hustle, And I think that a lot of the time we block ourselves from doing that sort of thing because we're embarrassed, or we think Reid Hoffman's never going to want to hear from me. But the Reid Hoffmans of the world want to hear about good ideas. Yeah. And when I get approached by someone with a great idea, maybe I can't respond to every email, but once in a while I'll be like, yeah, I'll meet with you. I'll spend 15 minutes, Show a lot of successful entrepreneurs do things like Facebook Live, or they have Twitter accounts and you can direct message them or tweet at them. I mean, there's so many ways to get in touch with leaders who inspire you. And for me, that was the most powerful way to learn how to create a business and get started.
Incredible. I just love the start. There's we categorize people who have already identified as creative or entrepreneur, the people who want to, and in this people who want to category, there's like you said, they're their own worst blocker. Yeah. Because it's the paralysis of having to get it right and having to know all the things, and no one who starts knows all of the things. You find
can't.
Out, yeah, you can't. All the things are just not knowable. Tell me a little bit about the U.S. stuff. I didn't know that you had a program here in the U.S.
Yeah, we launched, actually it's a funny story how it started. I told Tim this story. We had these ads running on Hulu in 2009 that were using footage from a refugee camp, and it's a tragic story. There's a refugee camp called Dadaab in Kenya that has had at its peak 900,000 Somali refugees caught in no man's land. And we'd done a program there, and the refugees were able to work for Microsoft from the camp. Mind-blowing. And so I made a little video about it with really bad footage, and it was running on Hulu, and this guy wrote me this email that was like, you are ruining America. You are stealing our jobs and sending them to Africans. And I was so heartbroken from this email because Sama's a nonprofit, so I can't sell it. I have no equity, and I'm not making money off of this. I'm doing it because I want to help solve this horrific refugee and poverty problem. And I immediately dashed off this nasty response to the guy, and then I didn't send it. One of the best pieces of advice I ever received is to never send an angry email, to sleep on it.
So smart.
I slept on it, and the next morning I was like, let me take a different tack. And so I wrote back and I was like, Dear Joe, I understand why you might be frustrated. It was just the recession had just started. It was 2009. I was like, we're losing a lot of jobs in America. Do you have any ideas for us on how we could do something in the US? Maybe there's some way. And he wrote back the nicest response. He was like, thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry I was harsh. I just lost my job and I live in Ohio, and we've lost tons of manufacturing because, companies are just looking for a quick buck. And it was this incredibly emotionally thoughtful response.
Wow.
And
not normal. This was not on YouTube.
This is not on YouTube, but this is a lesson to me that sometimes
so
when people are angry, you just need to listen to them.
Oh, it's the best advice.
And I think even, politically, we are in such a divisive place precisely because we're not listening to the other side and we're not being empathetic. So anyway, that inspired us years later to start a U.S. program. And we started in rural Arkansas because we had some connections to the Arkansas Economic Development Council that was really keen to bring jobs to this really low-income part of the country, the Mississippi River Delta, which is historically one of the poorest places in America. Mm-hmm. And it's got a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. People still make their living doing seasonal cotton picking. There are major educational gaps there. And so we decided to start a pilot in the middle of the Delta. And the idea was that we would train people to learn how to be successful on new online platforms for work, like Upwork is a good example. So now you can make money from your own home. Even if you live in a trailer in the middle of the Mississippi River Delta, you can make money doing things like data entry or virtual assistants, for a company in Los Angeles or New York. And you have a competitive advantage if you live in a place where the cost of living is, a tenth of what it is in San Francisco. So that was the premise, and we started it in 2012, and it's called Sama School. We've now trained over 30,000 people around the world, including in the US, in digital work skills that they can apply working from home. So these are like digital freelancing skills. So we have a social media marketing class. We have a lot of people who are now making money running social media for businesses remotely. We train them in things like community management. This is another growing field. Lots of companies are looking to hire people to like go and respond to Facebook comments on their brand, or like figure out what people are saying about their brand. And there are all these new ways to make money through the internet. And sadly, none of the federally sponsored job training programs are focused on that. Like the government's like 10 years behind job training.
Wow.
So we're the first job training program that's teaching people to leverage the digital economy.
So let's get tactical for a second. What if the folks on the other end of this broadcast or recording or visual editors, a million ways to consume this, how would you prescribe them get involved in what you're doing?
Sure. Well, they can take the Sama School classes. They're free, and they're really designed to help you get a leg in the digital economy immediately.
Okay.
And the other thing you can do, probably for your audience, is think about this kind of a model. Maybe you and your community can train people to do community management from your hometown. You can build a social media marketing agency. Now I think it's actually one of the fastest growing sectors. Every consumer brand needs community management people, and it's one of the things that builds the most brand equity. And it's hard, when you're getting started, to afford a full-time resource. So if you can build a small agency, you can make tons of money doing that as a freelancer.
Yeah, it is a big area of growth for a lot of small and medium agencies to do that. And solopreneurs, people that I know, a handful of people that do that for half a dozen companies. And if you piece together, it makes a pretty substantial amount of money doing something like that.
And you can work from anywhere, and you can also learn a lot of the tools around community management online. So you can teach yourself how to do it, run your business, get paid, all virtually. And you can live in a beautiful place in the Mississippi River Delta that costs, like 10 grand a year instead of 100 grand a year.
There was an article in, where was it recently? A Twitter engineer getting paid $160K was whinging about the absurd prices in San Francisco. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's nuts. I don't know why people we try to build our teams remotely as much as possible.
Yeah.
I'm actually looking at maybe switching my home base to Florida. This just makes so much more economic sense, and I just feel like we're paying a premium right now for the cost of living in the Bay.
Yeah.
But this is the beauty of the internet.
It is.
No longer are we constrained by where we happen to live. We can work for anyone from anywhere if we understand how to use that.
Yeah, I think that's another great takeaway, that embedded in the Samasource story is this opportunity. It's the first time in the history of the world where we can transcend not only economic boundaries, but geographic, social, cultural with the internet. You've done such an amazing job. I love it.
We're just at the beginning. I feel like we're Mark Zuckerberg always has this great quote, we're 1% of the way there. I feel like we're 1/10 of 1% of the way there.
And that equals 9 years. Tell me the story that you were sharing with me just a second ago. I love that about you're 9 years into Samasource.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're just getting started, but you also felt like you've been doing it for a while.
God, a long time. Since I was 25. Hard to imagine.
But you also, what was the story you just shared about, you were sort of ho-humming about grinding for 9 years or something, and you're profitable now, and you've got Samasource headed in the direction you wanted to. And wasn't there someone that was saying, "Oh, girl, you're just getting started"?
Yes.
Who's that? What was that?
It was such a good story. So we became profitable last year. After 9 years, we finally crossed 10 million in sales, and we now have 1,200 full-time agents who work for us, and the model's working. And it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get there. And
You
so
look
I was,
great, by the way,
Oh,
for all
thank
the
you.
blood, sweat, and tears. You look great.
Thank you. It's makeup. But I was meeting with the CEO of TomTom, a guy named Harold, who's based in Amsterdam. And TomTom we know from like the GPS, navigation
Mapping,
devices, but they actually now, their big business is mapping data.
Okay.
So they sell mapping data to the the Googles and the Ubers of the world. And so they're a big public company, beautiful, fancy offices. And I was telling him this story, and I was like, it took us 9 years to be profitable, not like TomTom. I mean, you guys were such an early success. And he looked at me and he's like, are you kidding? He's like, for 11 years, we never crossed 2.5 million in sales. 11 years. He and his wife started the business. And he said, we were just grinding away. We're trying all these different things. None of them were working. And then finally, we came up with the idea of building a GPS navigation device. And we did that. And finally, after 11 years of being 2 to 3 million in sales, we hit 40 million. And then the year after that, it was like over 100 million. And he said, but it took me 11 years to get to this point. And if I had quit at any point along the way, I never would have taken this company public.
That is I think it's a huge aspect of building anything, whether you're talking about a product or just as an entrepreneur, a business. There's grit is the thing that I talk about. Do you feel like that's what he's talking about?
Absolutely, grit and resilience. And I think the only thing that separates great entrepreneurs from failed entrepreneurs is an ability to not quit.
It's not magic dust.
It's
not raw talent. It's
not raw talent. It's not magic dust. I mean, I think it does take a certain kind of talent to not quit.
Yeah.
I think you have to be so committed and almost like a missionary for what you believe in. But I really don't think I like to think, it's easy to think that, that person was born with some special skill set, or, Steve Jobs is a creative, brilliant genius, and he probably was. But so many entrepreneurs just got where they are because they stuck through the tough times.
So true. Wise one, you wise.
Well, I don't know. Talk to me in 5 years. Maybe when I'm like penniless and homeless in San Francisco, I'll feel differently.
But to that end, you started another business. You told me this, I think, when I saw you in New York. Was it maybe at Founders Forum or something like that? You're like, I got to tell you, I started another business. I was like, what? Like double CEO duty here?
Yeah, because I like pain. I don't know. I don't recommend it, but Sama is now much more mature, and I created a new business called LXMI, LXMI, LXMI.com, and we are aiming to be, as CNBC called us 2 weeks ago, the Chanel of social impact.
Ooh.
So I wanted.
Did you coin that and feed it to them, or was that theirs?
I mentioned it, and then they were like, "Oh," and then they put that as the headline. So it was awesome.
Well played.
I don't know how Chanel feels about this,
Yeah.
but
And I was like, dagger.
But basically, I looked at the Samasource model, this give work model, and there are all of these interesting social enterprise models now that hire prisoners and low income people and women in developing countries who've been sex trafficked, all these marginalized populations. And there's nobody doing that in the luxury space. And if you think about how much money we spend on silly luxury goods, frankly, like I was spending, I always splurged on one thing, which was skin cream. My mom always taught me, you gotta make sure that you invest in your face. You only have one face. So buy the most expensive skin cream you can afford.
Nice.
And a lot of my girlfriends, similarly, they might be broke, but they will spend $100 on a really nice jar of La Mer or a Chanel skin cream. And I started doing more digging and realizing that a lot of these very popular, expensive skin creams are petroleum-based, have ingredients like yellow number 7 and red number 5 in them. Why would I want to put like a Skittle on my face? That have toxic emulsifiers and all kinds of nasty stuff in them. And there's such an opportunity to me to build a product that's good for you, the consumer, and good for the world, but that's appealing to a luxury consumer with beautiful packaging, amazing branding. Like imagine if you had a product that looked as beautiful as a Chanel product, but that was actually good for you and good for the world. It's high time we had that.
Sign me up.
Right? And we spend so much on luxury goods, and they're such high margin businesses usually that you can afford, if you're charging $100 for a skin cream, you can afford to bake into your economic model social good. You can afford to pay living wages to people in a developing country to produce the raw ingredient. You can afford to source from the fair trade factory. You can afford to make packaging that's more expensive but ethically produced. And so it's the kind of business model that supports social impact, I think, or should. And so that's the vision of LXMI. We started with skincare because we have access to amazing raw ingredients from northern Uganda. So we source from women who are mostly war widows. There was a horrific civil war in northern Uganda that Invisible Children made a big documentary about it.
Good film.
Killed, lots of young children as child soldiers, and this community is now struggling to recover from that war. And so the best thing we can do for them is not to give them handouts, it's to purchase things from them and pay them fair wages. And so we purchase a rare type of shea butter called nilotica. That's amazing for the skin. It's literally, I think it's the best thing you could possibly put on your skin. It's a superfood packed with vitamins A and E. And by purchasing this product, we sell it, we call it raw, pure nilotica melt. We sell it raw at Sephora. We're the first social impact brand to sell at Sephora.
You told me that before we started recording. That's huge. There's 300 stores or something?
300 stores, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough business, so we'll see how that goes. But we
Yeah.
launched in Sephora, we launched on QVC, we're about to launch with Ipsy this summer, and we sell it on our site. And I just think it's amazing that now you can buy a product that really, the packaging looks super high-end and luxe. It looks beautiful on a counter next to your favorite luxury product, but it's actually really good for the world. It's fair trade certified, it's organic certified. You could literally eat the product if you were in a pinch, and it would be great for you.
Wow. So, was it just because you saw the high margin and you saw what you built at Samasource, you put those two things together? Or like, what was the impetus? Was it like, what was the moment? Was there a spark, or was the spark was it a 5-year spark? A 5-year overnight success?
I'd been thinking this for a while. Like I'd wanted to start like Sama Beauty, I was calling it. And I have a real problem as an entrepreneur, which a lot of entrepreneurs have, which is I get excited by ideas. Yeah. I have like 80 domain names in my GoDaddy account.
Kate, if you're watching this is my wife. C. And then she's like, am I seriously renewing like 125 of these things again? Is this real life? Thank you for making me feel good about myself for a second, but now back to you. So it is a problem though, right?
It's a huge problem.
Chasing a lot of shiny things.
Chasing a lot of shiny things, and like entrepreneurs are by nature, we are optimists because we will something that didn't exist into existence, which means that you have to have like an unshakable kind of optimism, which means that you're probably optimistic about too many things, right? And so I had these so many different Sama ideas. I wanted to make Sama the Virgin of social enterprise, the Virgin group of social enterprise, right? And do Sama this and Sama that and Sama food and Sama beauty. I have all those domains. But I was thinking about this, and then I was in northern Uganda because we have a Samasource facility there that employs low-income women. And I was walking around in a local market, and I came across this nilotica product, and in a raw form in a little tub. And I put it on, and I was like, wow, this stuff is amazing. And I started doing more research and realized that nobody had really created a luxury brand around it. It'd been exported a little bit, like you could find it on Amazon, but no one, I thought, was doing justice to the powerful story of where this comes from, which is the most pristine, stunning region on Earth. It actually grows wild on trees on the banks of the Nile River, where the Nile River originates in Uganda. I mean, you couldn't think of a more perfect story for a skincare ingredient than this like luscious region. Yeah, and so the wheels started turning, and then I approached my board with Samasource and I said, can we start a beauty line? And they were like, well, why don't you start that as a separate company? And you have our blessing. And I donated 1/3 of my personal equity to the nonprofit. So if LXMI ever, does really, really well, the nonprofit will get a nice chunk of cash. It's basically a co-founder in the business. And I set it up as a separate company.
Wow, fascinating.
So we'll see how it goes, but it's really exciting. And I'm excited to take the give work model into a consumer brand. Yeah. Because I think we can generate so much more awareness of our mission that way.
You have insights that you can share through the story of the new product and not only inspire or empower, excite, create the movement for the consumer, but inspire other entrepreneurs too. I love it's sort of like there's a flywheel that you've started, and with the core idea that the things that you've uncovered, I know that you're going to keep spinning off more things. I got to go, I'm telling you, I know, it's like A, dangerous, but B, I got to go back to a comment that you said. I'm curious as hell. QVC, that shit is just, that is crazy. I mean, it's a huge business.
Yeah.
I'm dying to know what it's like if you're on QVC, you have the product on there.
Yeah. And I just sold it last week on air.
You did?
Yeah.
Was it amazing or weird or both?
It's so surreal. Like any company that measures revenue by the minute is doing pretty well. Yeah. And so
there's a big red ticker like that clock right there, isn't it? It's just like.
Yeah, and you have an earpiece and it's amazing. So I'd seen the movie Joy.
Yes.
Last year. I loved that movie.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, QVC would be so amazing, and figured out through one of my board members that I had a connection, and so she put us in email touch, and I managed to get a pitch meeting. And our CMO, who's really like my business partner in LXMI, she was like 5 months pregnant at the time, and she drove down from her house in New York, and I flew in, and we decided that we would focus the pitch on the fact that our raw ingredient was safe enough to eat. And how many skincare ingredients that are really effective can you say that about? And so we decided we would make chocolates out of the raw ingredient and serve the chocolates at the meeting. So Thea, 5 months pregnant, was the night before whipping up some truffles in her kitchen with Nilotica. And we showed up to the meeting, we opened this little box, and we're like, oh, here, we brought you guys some chocolates. And as they're eating the chocolates, I was like, guess what? You are eating the product that I want to sell on air. And then I took it out and I ate it from the jar, and I was like, this is pure Nilotica melt. This is a single ingredient, certified organic, fair trade product that is better for you than all of these petroleum-based things that women are buying and spending $100 an ounce on. And this is the purest, best thing you can put on your skin, and it's also good for the world. I want to expose America to this product. And they were like, sold.
I mean, like, I'm buying. I don't even my skin is like, I need a lot of help here, but my God, incredible.
But it's just funny how those and I think it's, I looked at that movie Joy and I was like, how did she do it? And it's funny how those examples, those real world examples, can inspire us. And so anyway, it's still a very long and tough journey ahead. We are by no means like a hugely successful brand. We're just starting out. But just to have that opportunity to sell on air is amazing.
Incredible story. The article in the New York Times that came out on Sunday, it talked a lot about it. There's this undercurrent. I think you've done such a nice job of reminding the folks at home, because I just made a video a couple days ago about it's so if you're sitting at home in your underwear in Ohio watching this right now going like, oh my God, how am I going to do it? And then you think you want to be, just like you, or just like this other inspirational character online, or X, Y, or Z. And what you have to do is be a little bit of you, a lot of you, and take little bits from these other things. But what you have done, I think, is you've created inspiration around your ideas, but you also, it's been a real undercurrent in this interview and in the New York Times, which I want you to talk about, is that it's hard. And that shit, it doesn't look like, it's not a TV series. It's not a 2-week sprint and then you're famous. It's not an overnight success. So can you fill in, just give us the arc of the story of the New York Times, and then talk to me, and we're really talking to the people who are listening and watching, about how that's why you should chase something you care about, is because shit's going to get hard, and when it does, you have to be there.
Totally. And I think there's an inbuilt advantage to mission-driven companies, which is that at the end of the day, even if you fail, you're doing something that is worthwhile, that is aligned with your values. So it's like, even if it doesn't make you money, you're still going to go to church. You're still going to go show up at the PTA meetings because you care about it, and you care about it for reasons other than financial gain. Mm-hmm. And that ultimately tides you through when the going gets rough, because you feel like you're doing something that's noble and that has a purpose. And so, the why. Yeah. I guess the Times piece was about resilience and getting through tough times. And my parents had a really tough, personal life, and there was a lot of chaos in my house growing up. And part of the reason I went to Africa was that I wanted to escape that. And it's interesting that now there are all these studies coming out about childhood adversity that show that adverse experiences can actually build resilience and grit, and can make you stronger, and can give you a superpower. They also might require you to have a lot of therapy and
right.
and need to meditate and do other things to kind of, I think, balance you out, because along with those gifts you can inherit challenges and problems. But I do think there's overwhelming evidence that we can turn really tough situations into opportunities and strengths. Sheryl Sandberg has this new book
Yeah.
that just came out called Option B, about how life can throw you lemons, and it's really about how you choose to act in those moments that demonstrate your character. And often there are so many things that can happen that are beyond our control that are really shitty, that really suck.
Yeah.
And they happen all the time to entrepreneurs. And so the Times piece was just about how I don't think I'm especially gifted at anything other than just, going when it gets really hard.
Force of nature. Again, the stamina piece. Embedded in that answer, you said things like whether you go to therapy or meditate or and I felt like there were some other things that you could say in that place. You were telling a story or part of a narrative arc, but let's go back and excerpt that for a second. And how do you manage all that stuff? Like, is it all of those things? Is it more? Talk to me about that. And again, the people at home want to know because it helps them feel okay about, there's so much that happens in the world where people are comparing their actual life with the highlight reels, i.e. social media, of others. And that comparison often creates a lot of anxiety and pain where the hope would be that it would inspire and cultivate. So I always ask my guests, like, talk to me about some shit that's hard and how you overcome it through, what are your medicines?
So I'm happy to share this because I don't think we talk enough about it. And I think people view entrepreneurs as like, oh, this person is superhuman. They're able to just like do this and they have such a happy, glamorous life because they just see the highlight reel on Facebook and no one posts the shitty moments on Facebook.
Right.
So when I was in college, my college roommate committed suicide. It was the same year that a family member took her own life. And it was the same year that I was working 3 jobs because my parents didn't have money. They'd gone through this really horrible divorce. My dad at one point was living in an RV. Like, it was not glamorous. And I struggled with depression for a lot of my 20s and some really low lows, like low enough that I didn't think I was going to make it. And I thankfully discovered 2 things that changed my life: therapy and meditation. And I will be vocal about it because I don't think enough people talk about it, but I think that we absolutely have to build these sorts of tools more into everyday life. If you're trying to get better at throwing a baseball or running, you hire a coach. Like, it's normal to have coaching for
sports or trainers or all those things.
Totally. Yeah. And there's still a lot of taboo around having a trainer for your brain, and that's the most important thing you have.
It is.
It's your biggest asset. And so I actually went through some real management difficulties when I was launching Sama because I had this like battlefield mentality from a lot of tough experiences in childhood and coming through, college. And so I had this like warrior mentality that I'd bring into the office and like create arguments with my team and not be the most empathetic manager. And it took a lot of, I think, hard lessons learned, a lot of people basically telling me like, you're a terrible manager, you need to change your style, for me to finally realize that I should see a coach. And so I did executive coaching, I did therapy. Even when I couldn't afford it, I found like low income, like therapists who would take on lower income people when I was struggling at the beginning of my entrepreneurship journey. And I just cannot stress enough how important that is.
And the discussion, to be able to see someone as successful and together as you are, that you've gone through that, I think I appreciate the sharing.
I think it's so helpful.
Yeah, it's so true. We're talking also about the meditation because coaching and low income coaching is still pretty expensive.
Yeah.
But talk to me about meditation.
Absolutely. So I read a bunch of books on Buddhist meditation. There's a great book by Pema Chodron that really helped me. It's called Buddhist Wisdom for Hard Times or something like that. And basically a lot of the concepts of Buddhism, which are very similar to a lot of the readings that I've, like what Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day from the Catholic tradition have said about Catholicism. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of the world's great religions say the same thing, which is that it's important to have contemplative time to reflect on the fact that the world is much bigger than just you, and that actually the idea that we're separate is kind of an illusion. We are all part of a bigger scheme of life. And if you reflect on that and realize that, okay, my struggle today is actually not that important because I'm part of this I'm basically inextricably intertwined with this person who's really succeeding, and with, the person I'm in a difficult relationship with, and with the person I'm managing who I'm struggling with. Like, we're all part of the same being in a way.
Yeah.
And so if you zoom out enough and realize that you're just a tiny piece in a larger whole, that can be a very cathartic feeling, especially if if your mind is so caught up in your current struggle. And
then the ego around that struggle, that's so much ego, and I think the Buddhist tradition does a really nice job of dealing with ego. You gotta park that stuff. But
absolutely.
Sorry.
No, and it's free.
Yeah.
It's like a free tool. You can use it at any time. And so a lot of those readings helped me. I started meditating. I try to meditate, even if it's like 10 minutes a day. I started going to church. I started going to Glide here in San Francisco, and I feel like for a lot of people, prayer can be that form of meditation. So it's not about the religious tradition. It's about finding that quiet, contemplative time to reflect on the fact that you are not alone, that you are part of a universe that is really in many ways a single whole.
Yeah.
And that can just be so heartwarming when you feel isolated and alone.
It is. Any habits that you would recommend or that you have adopted in your course of taking care of yourself and that helping with maximum performance?
So this sounds so cheesy, but when I'm really struggling and I'm feeling really low, even writing down 10 things that I am grateful for, that I feel like are gifts in my life. Like once I literally wrote down, like, my hair is actually pretty good. Like, I feel good about the way my hair looks.
I love it.
It sounds so cheesy, but
No.
I was like, okay, this is one thing that, like, even when the shit is hitting the fan, I can feel good about my hair.
Yeah.
Or, I wrote once about my dad, who's just like, we struggled in our relationship sometimes, but I just know that he will always be there, and he has this, like, essentially, deeply kind heart. And so just reflecting on whatever gifts they might be, like, I don't know what it might be, your cat, like the fact that you have a car that you like that doesn't break down, whatever it might be. But there's all this evidence now that shows that when you focus your brain on thoughts around gratitude, you can get out of that funk. And there's even a special meditation that Buddhists do called Tonglen meditation, which involves literally visualizing that you are inhaling the pain of someone else. It can be a particular person or group of people. So maybe you're like thinking about your aunt who has cancer or something. So you literally visualize that you're inhaling her pain with every in-breath and exhaling warmth and compassion, and like transforming that pain in your heart into warmth and compassion. And this sounds so cheesy and new agey, I know,
it doesn't.
but it works.
Yeah.
It totally works. And if you do that for 5 minutes, like whatever situation you might be in, you feel instantly better. It's like a drug. So Tonglen is really helpful.
It's free and available also. That's one of the things. Tim Ferriss, mutual friend of ours, actually the person who introduced us, I remember this now, he studied in Tools of Titans. The number one thread that connected the 200 people that he sat down with in this conversation was meditation, some form of mindfulness. It does not surprise me that is correlated so highly with high performers. Anything else? Any other habits? I love the gratitude, meditation. Anything else? Therapy?
So I also think that like physical expressions of frustration can be really helpful. So sometimes I just need to run out my problem, like go and like just run really hard for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and just like get it out. And I think everyone can relate to that feeling of needing to just like punch a wall sometimes. Yeah. So sometimes the only expression that works for me is physical, and even like, going to a dance class or something, but definitely something that has like rhythm where I feel like there's like impact. Can really
physicality is, I grew up as an athlete, and I can either use it to get out of a funk or use it to never get in one, and the choice is mine. You know what I mean? It's like if I'm exercising every day, it provides this sort of inner strength, and I realize that there is a correlation if I'm not taking care of myself, and in this case, it's sort of the physicality part, that I just tend to be in a funk more often. So that's super helpful. Thank you for sharing those things. And the story that you have, that is the arc of your life, is incredible. We feel so lucky to have you. Congrats on the major New York Times piece. That's
Thank you.
Stunning. And before we go, I want to tap into the new book that's coming out. I might beg you to come back on the show when it's actually dropping in September. But for folks at home, give us the preview. It's called
Give Work.
Give Work, and it should be out in September. And it's Is it your whole story, or is it a how-to guide? Give us a little bit of context.
Yeah, it's a mix of like the story of founding Sama and getting through that struggle, and also a call to action around changing the way that we think about poverty and how to fix it, from a handout mentality to an empowering give work mentality.
Leila, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, where can the people find you? What's your coordinates?
I'm LeilaJanah.com, and I'm Leila Janah.
Leila.
Leila Janah, and I'm on Facebook, social media. I do Facebook Live office hours every Sunday. So
every Sunday.
Every
Nice.
Sunday, I try to. I probably need to change that to a different day of the week to not be stressed out on Sundays.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
Super excited to have you. And with that, I'll see you again probably tomorrow.